It doesn't mean that the experience itself will be sexually fulfilling and pleasurable for you. And a lot of women are often sold this myth, particularly if they are in religious environments or conservative environments. In fact, actually, your enjoyment of sex is irrelevant often in the eyes of those systems of power. Okay, if you have been raised to assess a man's character viability for marriage based on, other qualities, and sexual compatibility isn't one of them, then of course sometimes you can find yourself disappointed or wondering why you're not enjoying the sexual experience, because you may have thought to yourself, well, he's a good person, so actually, why wouldn't I enjoy having sex with him? Or you may even be attracted to his personality and character, but not actually enjoy having sex with him at all. It was very interesting, actually, because there was a piece of content that came up in my feed the other day, and it was asking women anonymously why they chose to marry their husbands. And it was interesting that quite a few women said it was because they were physically and sexually attracted to their husband, and they were sexually fulfilled in that relationship. That's why they chose to marry the man, and that's why they're in the marriage. And if you looked in the comments, there were women saying, not everything's about sex, it doesn't always matter. And I thought that was very interesting because, of course, we all have certain preferences and ideas about sex based on different things, our backgrounds, our upbringing, culture, religion, etc. But actually, I think something that can sometimes go unspoken and you can experience if you're new to sex or you're abstaining is that sexual compatibility, is not a reward or a guarantee, even if you're just because you're aligned morally. Right, just because you share certain values with a man, it doesn't mean that you are automatically going to be sexually compatible or that you will feel sexually attracted to him. Okay, the fact of the matter is there are many things that make up or contribute to sexual compatibility, to a sexual experience being mutually pleasurable. Okay, so if you are somebody now. Again, I shouldn't have to say this. In no way am I pushing back or questioning the decision to abstain from sex, not have sex before marriage, or wait to have sex when you feel that it's appropriate. Actually, this conversation still very much applies. And it's a conversation sometimes that people have, or women can have behind closed doors, hence why those stories were submitted anonymously. Because some women feel a lot of shame about acknowledging what their sexual desires are, what their sexual taste is. And they may never actually have shared that with the person that they're with. Okay, not everybody feels confident enough. They may deem it to be too bold or deem it not to be feminine in terms of that good girl image that women are encouraged to play up to, right? And so they may not have been that open, or they may have underestimated how important sex was actually for them. And I think we sometimes forget, living in a society that is so sexualized, it doesn't necessarily mean people are sexually literate, that people are comfortable having conversations in real life about sex with the people that they're having sex with, which is a little bit bizarre, because if you're about to take your clothes off with someone in or outside of marriage and you don't feel like you can talk about sex, there's some work to be done there. All right. And so there are women who make choices in husbands. Again, obviously, the decision to get married often is multifaceted, right? You may be thinking about all manner of other things like financial security, the vision you have for your household and family. You might be getting married because it's a rite of passage, etc. But the point is, there are women who maybe underestimated how much physical attraction meant to them, how much of a factor physical attraction actually is when it comes to marriage and sex specifically, okay? Because you can't really always fake attraction, especially not on a bodily level. And, the fact of the matter is that a lot of the time men may expect sex. That's what they want in the marriage. And so if you've chosen to marry someone that you're not physically attracted to, you're not sexually attracted to, and or maybe you get into the marriage and you thought because they're a good person, yada, 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 the sex will be fine, you might find, and this is something sometimes women are less comfortable talking about openly, you might find that you're not enjoying that sex. And that could be confusing. It might feel like a bit of a dilemma for you because actually, on the face of it, you like this person. In the face of it, you feel that they had certain qualities, maybe qualities as a father, qualities as a human being that you admire and you respect. But actually, on that deep physical level, you're not attracted to them and you're not enjoying the sex. Okay. And so it's the truth of the matter is that sex is not kind of a public, it's not like a public performance, right? And actually, because it is very much a private interaction, you are not really obviously going to experience that person in that context until you're in private and you're actually having sex. So one of the things I will say, because this is a question that came through to me, is that honest sex, in my view, is pleasurable sex. It increases the chances of the sex being pleasurable. I hesitate to use the word best because best could mean different to anybody, right? You can have best car of 2026, best mop for apartments, right? Best is subjective. But one of the things that may not be subjective to your body is pleasure. And I think one of the things that's really underestimated is how much honesty matters. Okay. The more honest you can be about your desires is the more chances you probably have of experiencing the type of sex you want to experience and experiencing the type of pleasure that you want to experience. And because there are so many invisible contracts that women are conditioned and socialized to obey around sex, what can happen is that women either do not take the opportunity to learn what they want, what they like, and what I call pleasure authority. They're not exercising that pleasure authority. And so when you find yourself in a situation where you're not necessarily enjoying the sexual interaction with somebody that you might respect and like, mind you, you don't want to hurt their feelings, you don't want to offend them, you don't want to cause any discord, you don't want there to be any bad feelings or for someone to feel insecure, you might not actually say, I don't really enjoy this, or I don't like this. Or as I say, sometimes you can be confused as to why the two things don't align. But the thing about honesty when it comes to sex in particular, and this is very important because actually sex is one of the invisible concepts around sex. There's usually three big ones: sex, money, and religion, that really impacts women. Okay. And the obedience to the invisible contracts connected to all those three things can really impact the material quality of your life and the way you experience life as well. That's why it's so important to have these conversations, because the more honest you can be, and hopefully mutually be, the more curious you can be, the more effective the communication can be. You can experiment. You can say yes fully, and you can also say no fully. You get to actually acknowledge and sometimes admit what you actually enjoy, and hopefully then move away from the sex being performance based. You can stop pretending, and start to experience and be present. And the thing is that it is true that sometimes, because of the certain attitudes that men have around women and sex, some of them don't expect a woman to be vocal and clear about what she enjoys. Some of them may well judge you for doing that, especially maybe if you're a virgin or you're inexperienced sexually, and therefore they think, well, where did you get all this information or knowledge from? Which is very ignorant, because again, if you're an adult, you should be exercising pleasure authority. You should be an active participant in your own sexual experiences. Being educated, gathering information is, part of that. And so it can feel maybe even uncomfortable for you to express what you do and don't like, and actually to experience maybe a man saying, well, where did you get that from? Why do you feel that way? Or him making assumptions and then expressing his conclusions about the fact that you know yourself. That is an immature man. That's all that comes down to. He's immature. The other thing is sometimes men will make out like they're more experienced than they actually are as well. You see, and there's a couple of things to be said here at this point. One, just because someone's had sex with many people, more than one person, that does not mean that they are experienced when it comes to pleasure. And what can happen, and this might sound like a generalization, but what can happen is some people are having, yes, high volume, like a high volume of sexual experiences, it doesn't mean that they are quality experiences. It doesn't mean that they are pleasurable. And so don't assume that because a man has had sex with maybe more people than you, that he is more knowledgeable and that he's more sexually literate, that he is more skilled, as it were, because really sex is kind of a skill as well, right? It's something that you can learn. But again, even if you do view it as a skill, it doesn't mean that you can sometimes manufacture sexual attraction and chemistry. That's not always possible, right? So the point is, don't make those assumptions. And sometimes when you're dealing with a man who gets put off or, draws a conclusion about you and your value based on the fact that you can articulate what you want, um, you know, sometimes it's because they're not actually as experienced as you may have assumed they are. And the other thing is that, as I say, sex is, it's about skill and taste as well. Some people are okay with very, mechanical sex. They are, right? Mechanical. I won't use the word vanilla because that's not the right word. Mechanical sex. That's their thing. And if you match with somebody else, beautiful. Then there's people who have different tastes. There's different levels and aspects to sex, really, especially when it comes to pleasure. And so actually, this does require some honest conversation. And honest sex is usually the most pleasurable sex. So you could honestly both be on the same page about mechanical sex. You could honestly be on the same page about, just one position, for example. Whatever it is, the honesty matters. And I think the trouble is obviously for women when it comes to these invisible contracts around sex is that you're often hiding or shrinking or withholding, if you even know, what your true desires are, what your true preferences and tastes are. But then when you choose to break those invisible contracts and exercise pleasure authority, the actual experience itself will materially change. Now, that might mean you no longer have sex with that particular person. But if you do continue to, if they are mature and they're genuine and sincere, actually it will materially change the experience. And as far as I'm concerned, who's got time to waste their good pH balance? So really and truly, it's important to have these conversations with yourself, maybe a trusted friend. And when I say with a trusted friend, you don't have to share material details, of course, necessarily about the other person. I'm talking about your journey when it comes to pleasure authority and being able to communicate what it is that you actually want. But, the fact of the matter is, ironically, when you can be more honest, it creates more safety in your body. And that's what your nervous system needs. Okay. In order to receive, in order to flood your system with pleasure, unpleasurable sensations, there's an element of being present and feeling safe in your body. Okay. And that then means that you can have more freedom, as it were. That means that you can express yourself more fully sexually. And that is worth exploring. It's worth pursuing. It's such a shame to think that as women, we have an anatomy that actually means that we can experience pleasure and multiple types of it, layers upon layers and levels. And actually, unless we are willing often to exercise pleasure authority, we may never experience that. And we've only got one life, one body. Okay. And so it's worth thinking in yourself, actually, could I have the courage within myself? Could I step into pleasure authority and really discover what it is that I like? Now, somewhere in the link somewhere, there'll be the free Invisible Contract Framework download. And that will enable you to privately reflect on the invisible contracts that you are obeying. Because here's the thing, like I said, sex, religion, money, those are the big three often for women when it comes to abdicating self-authority, because that's what's we're conditioned and trained to do from girlhood. And so what you'll find is that this will show up in other areas of life, whether it is money, whether it is the workplace. It will show up in other areas of life as well. It won't just be in terms of our sexual experiences that we may find that we are shrinking, we're hiding away, where we haven't really started operating in our full all authority. Now, the last thing I will say, which is something that came up in a session I was running recently, was about the conversation. For some women, they often discover there are things that they like and enjoy, sometimes by accident. And one of the things that came up in that session was this whole thing about the bad boy. And I think there's a show on Netflix that was being discussed where there's a wife who's been married for many years, but she married the good man, right? She married the good man, they had kids together, but there was an old flame that she had a really exciting and sexually fulfilling relationship with. And basically, the show kind of, I don't know, shares the story, tells the story of her reconnecting with that old flame and the way it impacted her marriage and the fact that she was fundamentally dissatisfied sexually in her marriage. Now, I'm sure experts in all the fields, whether it's psychology, sex therapy, will have all their views on this. But what I thought was interesting when we were having the conversation was that, a lot of the time women are demonized for being attracted to what is often described as the bad boy. Now, my estimation of the bad boy is not that he's a criminal, okay? But often to a man who may seem more exciting, a man that, she has chemistry with, etc. Now, I'm not talking about men who are abusive, coercive, violent, or criminal or exploitative here. But I think sometimes in the context of somebody, a man that is unapologetically themselves, a man that might be playful, curious, a man that is indeed embodied, like what you see is what you get. He's not ashamed of who he is. He knows how to have fun, relax. He may be adventurous, for example. He's comfortable with his own desires and he expresses his own desires. He expresses a desire for you. You see, there's a congruence, there's a coherence that exists in a lot of these individuals. There is an equivalent often for women, right? There are women who are unapologetically themselves, and that is very attractive and magnetizing to other people. Okay, and so sometimes, again, I think this is demonized and women are thought to be fickle and they're not loyal. But the point of the matter that I'm making is that the truth of the matter is women's sexual desire is understudied, underobserved. Okay, and the fact of the matter is women also desire variety, novelty, diversity in experience, and ultimately pleasure. I alluded to the fact earlier that your body is intelligent. It remembers, you know full-bodied experiences. It does. The same way it can remember trauma is the same way it can remember pleasure in all of its guises and textures and layers and colors. And so, of course, often women sometimes choose a man that they think is a sensible choice, and they choose to sacrifice maybe the sexual chemistry. They may be happy to experience mechanical sex or sex that's okay. Maybe they're not having orgasms, they're not experiencing pleasure particularly. And then there are other women who are not willing to sacrifice that. Other women who are exercising pleasure or authority. Now, I am not suggesting that it's okay for women to cheat on their husbands. I used that example for the overall principle. I'm not saying that that's okay or advisable or recommended. I'm saying that often this kind of, again, it can be quite unsettling and shocking for other people, and men in particular, to see women exercise pleasure or authority and be clear on what they like and what they want and uncompromising in that. And sometimes who they find that with is not somebody that other people would approve of, or they're deemed to be the bad choice. Now, again, hear me well when I speak of this. I'm not talking about people who are materially bad. I'm talking about it's a certain kind of coherence and congruence that a person who is truly being themselves, and like I said, honest sex is usually the most pleasurable. And so when two people who are honest about their desires and honest about the experience they're trying to co-create engage, the chances are it's going to be more pleasurable for both, but particularly that woman. And actually, a lot of the time, the individuals who are comfortable with desire, they therefore provide an environment for the other person, and in this case, women, to be comfortable with their desire, to explore that desire without judgment. And a lot of the times, like anything, I think this is a human thing, but it can happen definitely for women. When it comes to engaging in sexual activity, you're not really trying to occupy a role per se, right? You're not trying to necessarily to be the caregiver, caretaker, to be the good girl. Again, honest sex, so honest sexuality, honest desire, you know, requires a certain level of being able to relax and abandon. Okay, not abandon your senses, but it requires some of those elements, and that's why you find, if women are being honest in private conversations, sometimes who they are genuinely intrinsically on a body level attracted to isn't what you would expect. And I think as well, it's not always the man that is like handsome, pretty, cute. It's not always that man either. See, people often assume that it might well be. It's not, because a lot of this is energetic. It's an energy, okay? It's an energy that people carry with them when they are, as I say, congruent within themselves. And so it's not always who you expect women to be attracted to. But if you followed the script as a woman, you might have chosen someone for many other reasons, some of which will be valid for you. But it might mean that you have to work harder in the area of sex, or that area might not be fulfilling for you, essentially. The last thing I'll say about this as well is that part of the problem is a lot of women are very caught up in whether or not that man is attracted to them, is choosing them, thinks that they're pretty. You might be very self-conscious about your body and thinking, is he actually deeply, inherently sexually attracted to me? And I think that when you are operating in your pleasure authority, you ask yourself, do I actually enjoy being here? Do I want to be here? Am I enjoying this? Do I enjoy him? Not just emotionally, not just morally, but sensually, physically, on a nervous system level. Your experience matters too. And the thing is, when you start sinking into thinking, do I enjoy being around him? Am I enjoying this experience? It can be a little bit scary, because actually now you're assessing it on different metrics entirely. And like I say, if you're already in the relationship and you want to keep that relationship, that will mean you have to exercise pleasure authority and actually communicate and ask for the things that you actually want in that scenario. So I will encourage you, of course, to download the free framework download, so that you can start to privately reflect on some of these invisible contracts.